everybody. I hope you are well and safe. I've got a little talk for you about a project I've been working on for a couple of years now called Wonder VR, which is about the creation of bespoke virtual reality experiences for patients in the NHS who are living with dementia or who are long stay patients who might experience delirium, or they are just very bored in hospital and are missing friends, family, pets, their lives outside. I mean, I think this is a massive reality for lots of people at the moment. But this is a project that was established a couple of years ago that's looking at how do we create experiences of wonder and what can that do for the subjective well-being of the people that we're working with. This presentation is going to be mainly talking about stories from the project, but if you're interested in the theory and the background of the ideas that are behind it, then I'll pop a couple of links and papers up about critical wonder. It's mainly based in aesthetics and art aesthetics, and there's one book that I think you quite like by Philip Fisher called The Aesthetics of Rare Experiences about rainbows, which I quite liked reading about rainbows, I have to be honest. But he explains it quite nicely, so I'll try and drop in some of his key points as we go through, as they make sense with the stories. But I wanted to share with you the way that patients have been responding to VR, because that's the thing that's kind of helped us learn. This is a practice research project, so the practice is the research. It does the job of investigating something through its existence, and that each stage of it enables us to learn something new. There's lots of different layers of things going on here that I thought would be useful to share with you. I do have a co-facilitator who... Facilitator, is she helping? I don't know. Maybe difficultator, who's going to join me for this. Some of you might have met her, I'm not sure. Her name's Lou. She is... well, she's interesting anyway, and I'm sure she'll pop up in a minute for you to meet her, and she'll introduce herself.
Is that the third years? Can I say hello to the third years? Why not? I'm more interesting than you anyway. Just introduce me at least.
Everybody, this is Lou, and she's leaving now.
Fine. See you later. Bye.
Yeah, she's something else. Anyway, let's get cracking with what this project is about. So the story is it starts quite a long time ago. I think it's quite useful for me to share a bit about how this project even started, because it will give you some idea about why it's shaped the way it is. So let's go back 5 years, time travel with me, and we got an email from a nurse in the NHS who worked in Brazil for a long time with clown doctors, which are quite a big thing. For her, she's seen a lot of clown doctors working in Brazil in various different hospitals, and then noticed that that's not really a thing here. It's becoming increasingly interesting, I think, for different groups, but it's originating in lots of different practices. She emailed drama schools around London to ask if she could bring drama into the hospital, and even if it wasn't for clown doctors, could the arts provide something important for patients? And I got this email from Susie in reception. Thank you, Susie. Really thank you, because I don't think I've ever learnt so much in my life. And I responded and said, yeah, we'd be interested. I've never worked in the NHS, and I'm going to be honest with you, I have quite a phobia of hospitals. I was quite frightened. Bad experiences, bad memories, but thought, if we can help in a context, I think we have a duty to try. So I emailed them, and we had a meeting in the Hampstead Theatre, and talked through what's possible. And I was really struck by the approach taken to the meeting by the nurse consultant, Jo James, who's a bit of a ledge. Some of you know her already. You probably worked with her or worked with her team if you did the Call Out project last year. Or you've done some intergenerational work with me before as well. She has the attitude of saying yes to all your ideas. She always has the attitude of let's try. We don't know unless we do it. We can't innovate unless we are prepared to fail. And the only way to know is to be creative and give it a go. And I have to say, that's quite a rare attitude to come across the first time you've met somebody, which intrigued me, and I thought, let's see what we can do. And then we set up the first call-out project going on in the NHS, and then the projects kind of grew from there. If you're interested in the different ones, I can tell you about them. But the one I'm going to focus on is the VR one, as I mentioned. And there's a nurse in Joe's team, Tash, who's brilliant, and she has got a strong interest in VR in healthcare. And a lot of VR that's used in healthcare at the moment is used for training surgeons or to prevent falls or fitness. There's lots of different ways people are using it, but they're not really using it for well-being and storytelling. And they haven't used it in such a way that it would be bespoke. So this is, to my knowledge anyway, I think more projects will come up because we're in a lockdown situation that do similar things, which is great. But this is the first project of its kind to be tailored for each individual person about their lives, what they'd like to happen, and what they miss from the everyday that we could maybe bring into hospital to make their stay a little bit easier. And there's lots of reasons to do this project. The context of a hospital is that about 60% of people over 65 years old come out of hospital with a mental health condition because of the impact of their stay. That doesn't mean they've had a bad time, it's just that being in a hospital can impact your mental health, especially if you've been there a long time. It can be confusing, it can lead to delirium, which is a type of confusion. That can be quite scary because you can hallucinate, you can imagine all sorts of narratives about that place, for example, that no one's letting you leave. So often a delusion is that people feel that they've been kidnapped. My nan went through this, so it's another reason I wanted to do this particular project. It took her 3 months to come out of her state. She thought she was a spy for a while, which was interesting. But it can manifest in all sorts of different ways. A quite common thing, I think Oliver Sacks talks about this in his book about the brain, dementia and memory, called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Great title. He talks about there being a delusion for people thinking that the nurses are trying to poison them, for example. And it's often because the nurses are bringing food, and then you think, I'm being kept here against my will, I don't know why, because I can't remember why, and clearly now they're trying to poison me. What's going on? So those are common delusions which can be really frightening, and if someone enters a delirious state, it can take them a lot longer to get better. My nan, for example, had recovered from pneumonia and could have gone home, but because she entered this state, it took another 3 months before she could actually come back home. So part of the project is thinking about well-being and how to keep someone in the present, and how to bring things that are familiar into the hospital, or familiar environments, to look at how we might improve well-being for patients. Part of the reason that delirium's caused, as I mentioned, is because people are socially isolated, and it can lead to a state of boredom. And then when you get to boredom, you can enter a state of confusion because you try to put things together or make sense of things. And if your memory isn't 100% and you're potentially on lots of medication, time can become confused. You can have quite vivid dreams, and then entering between those different states can start to create the delusion, which can be quite frightening for people. There's also, when you're in hospital, a part of the reason for this is that you also have a reduced sense of agency. Like, a lot of people are deciding stuff for you. It's probably a bit like this at the moment. If you've gone back to your parents, maybe, I was going to say hands up, but I won't see you, but you could do hands up if you like. Anyone whose meal times are suddenly 5 p.m? Yeah, we're not kind of used to that. Or that people have quite set schedules in their day that you need to fall back into. In a hospital, it's the same thing. There's medication that happens at a particular time because it has to. There are meals that have to happen at a certain time as well to keep you healthy, keep you fed. You don't really have an awful lot of choice in that. If you want to go to the toilet and your mobility is limited, you have to call a buzzer for a nurse to come and take you, and they'll take you when they can. Or you'd have a catheter, and so you actually that you can go when you like. But it's not necessarily a pleasant experience. So you're missing a lot of agency, that things you take for granted and do for yourself at certain points. So a lot of your independence is gone, and people are making decisions about your health and about your body, which is really difficult. Sometimes nurses are coming up to you and taking your bloods, and they may or may not introduce themselves. There's a whole thing about empathy in the NHS and thinking about why we need to maybe at least introduce who you are and what you're doing to people, particularly if they are experiencing confusion. It can just add to the delusion. If someone's grabbed your arm and is taking your bloods and you're distressed, you might hit out, which would make sense if you think that someone's trying to hurt you, or it's painful because it's a blood test, it's not pleasant. And it can be quite frustrating for everybody in when somebody's in that state. The nurse is trying to do their job, they've got to get around the whole ward. At the same time, the patient's feeling very distressed and really agitated, and is also not having a great time. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on in a hospital setting that takes away agency, independence. And there's also this thing about uncertainty that's really difficult to deal with. You might be waiting for test results, you might be waiting for visitors, or you might not have any visitors, and just waiting to go home or moving to a care home, and that can also be really scary because you aren't returning to your own house, which kind of suggests you might have lost some of your independence, or you're missing your things, you don't know how they're going to get there. There's a lot of uncertainty in hospitals, and I was interested in what VR could do to provide certainty and playfulness and joy in this kind of context. Like, can you create joy when someone is feeling all these things? And then on the other side of this project, some of the other context happened in Nancy-Verne, which feels like a bit of a jump, but bear with, as Miranda says. There is a link. I got VR cameras from some funding because I'd heard that they were kind of cool, and I thought, well, that's quite a good skill. Quite like if the students came out with some skills in VR and AR, because they're useful things to have. They kind of give you a different skill set to other drama school graduates coming out that maybe haven't played with technology or thought about the role of transmedia storytelling in their work. So transmedia, kind of thinking about how you move between different media to create an interactive story. I've actually just made one for a call-out group, so I'll add a link if you would like to play it. And you just need to do it on your phone or tablet or computer. Anyway, I thought it would be the only way to really learn VR is to teach myself, because I couldn't afford the courses, they're very expensive. So I learned from YouTube, as you do. Very many things you can learn from YouTube. And then thought I'd push myself to see if I really learnt it by building it into the curriculum and running sessions. And I think when you are forced to find a way, not forced, I chose, but when you kind of put yourself in a position where you have to transmit what you know to someone else, it reinforces your own learning, which is really useful. So I built in masterclasses to call out, and I set one of the projects to play with VR and just see what it did. Just so they learned to use the camera, and if they wanted to use it they could, and if they didn't, they didn't have to. And this was probably 3.5 years ago now, something like that. And I said I'd support the group. They were my group anyway, and we said we'll just play with it and see what happens, and if we like it we'll use it again, and if not, it's alright, you don't have to, it's just an option. And the young people in Nancy-Verne, which is a SEND school, a brilliant school actually, they really took to VR, they really liked it. And we know from last year's group who went that actually VR and AR made quite a huge difference to the impact on the lives of one of the young people there, who would have potentially been put into respite care if he hadn't been engaging with school, but he liked the AR so much that he was visibly engaged in the work, and they're now using it all the time, and they're using VR all the time because the group love it. And it came from, it's got this legacy that's gone back a few years, and each year people have built on it. Anyway, going back, the thing that was important about this trip was that I was observing on the last day of the project, and there was one boy in the year group who'd had a lot of trouble coordinating his movement. He had lots of challenges with, I guess, controlling movement and the way that he would coordinate his actions. So he would do lots of spinning on the spot, especially if he kind of had sensory overload. It would be a way to kind of unwind. And often his arms he wouldn't mean to, but sometimes he would accidentally hit out. Not to hit, but just to reach out. And if you were in his path, he was quite a tall lad, then you had to duck a little bit. But he really wanted to have a go in the VR. He kept kind of approaching it, but to put a VR headset on it, it's quite difficult. It can cause a lot of sensory overload potentially, and we tried it on tablets, but he really wanted the headset. And it was the last day, in the last hour, and suddenly he got up in the debrief and went over to the headset, and everybody was a little bit shocked and walked around to make sure they could spot him so he didn't bash into anything. And his movements, which were quite erratic before, he happened to watch a National Geographic video, which was kind of interesting. We kept it on a loop so we knew the videos were safe on a playlist on YouTube. And it happened to be scuba diving, and someone was just swimming about. And he put the headset on, and suddenly all the erratic movements changed, and you could see him swimming and following this exact movement, completely coordinated, and having a great time, laughing and giggling, calling out what he could see, and both us and the teacher were kind of a little bit shocked about this, and thought there's some possibilities here about motor control that could be related to VR. Which is another reason I wanted to see what would happen in a hospital context, where actually mobility is really limited or difficult, but there seems to be something enabled when you can't see your own limbs, but you might see somebody else's, or you could see a different type of space. And the excitement that it brought him and the group fascinated me, and I wondered what could happen. So I asked my pal Jo, and as always she says, well, try, work with Tash, and let's see what happens. And we developed a practice that works bedside, one-to-one, with patients, and they get given a tablet like this, or a phone, or a laptop, whichever one they want to try with first of all. And they have the option of the headset, but we usually build up the screens, just so people feel comfortable, not too worried, because again, being in a headset when you're not feeling great or a bit paranoid about what's going on can just add to that, so you have to be really careful. And not everybody is experiencing delirium when we're working with them, but some people are. Some people are experiencing schizophrenia, lots of different things, or just really lonely or low mood, as they term. That's the term that the hospital use. People just not having a great day. So we thought we'd try, and people were invited to just see some demo videos. Again, National Geographic is great because a lot of people miss their pets, and there are some brilliant video. I'll put some up as well. Some brilliant videos of different animals and things that you can see, and that brought a lot of joy to the patients. And if they wanted to, and if they liked it and they were interested, we would make them their own bespoke VR about things that were important to them. So I wanted to tell you about a couple of stories. Now you've got the origins of this, and hopefully you're still with me, still awake. Lovely. And I wanted to tell you some of their reactions to some of the stuff that we made. So bear in mind that these are simple stories. They're not elaborate plots, they're just simple things. So let me tell you about Mary. Obviously we've changed the name, so you don't know. I don't know who we are. I think that's me and Lou. Maybe. So I wanted to talk to you about Mary, who was about to be moved to a care home, and she was really, really grieving for her home, her own home, her independence, and was missing family and friends, and also had to give up her dog, which was completely, you can imagine, right? Heartbreaking for her, because that's her company, that's part of her independent life. It's also a being that looks after her, and she looks after them as well. So she was really upset about missing her dog. And Mary, her whole life, wanted to visit the zoo, and for many, many different circumstances had never managed to afford to go to the zoo, and is now in a position with limited mobility, limited funds, and was about to be moved to a care home, which was pretty far away from where she wanted to visit the zoo. She was really sad about this, so we wondered if we could bring the zoo to her. So we did. We worked with her to talk about her favourite animals. There were many. We filmed more than she asked for, just in case she wanted to see some more. She was interested, being very mindful that we'd need to tell her what the animals were in case they also were frightening for her. Not everybody likes lions and tigers, and she really wanted monkeys and some other rare animals around the zoo. And giraffes, she wanted a giraffe. So we filmed some of the animals in 360 with a student from the MA Applied Theatre course who would work bedside with Tash to work out what the story was. And the story was literally a trip to the zoo. And the student was in the shot as well, so it's a familiar face for the patient, for Mary. And all she did was just spend some time and just point out things with the animals, and sort of ask some questions for her to think about, as if they'd gone to the zoo together. So she's talking to camera to give her that experience of immersion, but also that she is a person in that video, she's not kind of away from it. And they showed Mary the video, and she was absolutely ecstatic, was laughing and smiling, and lots of commentary about the animals. And I think that the student had waved at that point at some of the animals, at some of the monkeys, and she happened to wave in the headset at the same time, so they looked around and she thought that was brilliant. And it happened to be just great timing. But for her, it meant that they were reacting to her in that space, and she was really excited about it, which was great. And the same thing with the giraffe, which is massive. She thought that was great. She had to look up to see it, and of course in VR you can look all the way around you, above and below you, and it captures everything. So she could really have a trip to the zoo to see those animals, and she was really pleased. And she took it with her to the care home. So for her, she can visit those animals whenever she wants to. They're there all the time. They won't change. The video is very unlikely to degrade or take a long time for that to happen because it's digital. So in the midst of lots of uncertainty in her life, it becomes a little bit, not that this is the only thing, of course there's many other things that are needed, but it's an anchor. It's a way for her to reconcile what's going on in the present and to revisit a world that she's wanted to visit her whole life whenever she wants to. And that's her independence, that's her agency to do that. So we were interested in that because we didn't know what it would do, if she'd like it, she hated it, or if it would even be immersive or good enough quality. And then we were using a Ricoh Theta camera, an S, which is an earlier make, which is HD, but actually the depth on it isn't amazing. But she still liked it, which was great. We now use the Ricoh Theta V, which is a 4K camera, and uploads to YouTube with 4K footage, so it's much higher quality and gives you much better depth perception. I'll give you an example. Let me see if I can get permission from a student who made something recently for us on a beach in Thailand over Christmas, because I mean it's beautiful footage. It's a private beach, it's amazing. But anyway, let me tell you about another story. I would like to tell you about Peter. We found that a lot of the things that are really important for patients, and this is something that's obviously well known to a lot of people, is connection. But sometimes it's quite hard to find connection. It's quite awkward when you're meeting a patient and you're working bedside. There's a whole psychology about where you should stand if you're working with a patient. The end of the bed is the worst place because that's where doctors deliver news, often bad news, or updates, or tell you if you have or haven't got a place in a care home, or you're going home, or you can't be discharged yet. So it's a place of news. So we want to avoid the place of news and go to a place that feels more familiar and creative. And sometimes patients are super chatty, and other times they want to talk, but it's difficult because they might be worried about not remembering all the words. So sometimes you just need a stimulus, and that can easily be anything. But for us that became the VR, because we can take trips to anywhere in the world. There's so many VR videos already up on YouTube that create connections with people and that capture loads of different spaces, that it gives you a brilliant opportunity to visit there when you like. So we happened to look again at some ideas of coral reefs and thinking about what that would be like, and Peter decided he wanted to explore that particular video, so he was watching it and he said to us, I think this is more entertaining for you than for me. He worked in technology, television for a long time, so I think he's quite used to these kind of innovations, and VR has been around a lot longer than we think it has, for many decades actually. If you're interested, read the work of Jaron Lanier and his books about VR. One of them is called I'm Not a Gadget, very interesting, and the other one's looking at virtual reality and the history, and he's one of the pioneers of VR. I'll pop that down as a little reference if you're interested. Anyway, and Peter was an adventurer, and we had no idea about anything about his life. The nurses knew a little bit because they were brilliant at talking to him, and the dementia team, that's what they do. They create connections with patients, they support them with nutrition, but they also do social activities and events for them. And Peter started telling us all about his adventures when he was scuba diving, or when he was exploring different places around the world, and it sparked a huge conversation. And I suppose in terms of what you could see in him, he got very excited. He started telling us lots of different narratives. He liked and enjoyed the awe that people were giving as a response to the stuff that he'd done. Sometimes I think that there's a judgment on older adult patients who people may see as more frail bodies, but actually there's just such a wealth of experience in people that we forget sometimes. And Peter reminded us about how much of an adventurer he'd been and the life that he'd led, which was actually incredible. And it just took the VR to open up the discussion. And of course that could have been any objects, but we noted then that for Mary VR was something aspirational. We weren't returning to a place but capturing something that she'd always wanted. But Peter, we were looking more kind of historical and started to trigger memories and stories and discussion and excitement from immersion in a virtual world. And whether or not that would be the same with something that was a flat on the screen and not something that you could kind of move your tablet or phone around to explore, I don't know. Maybe. But maybe the immersion gave an extra layer of excitement there that reminded him of something, because he was looking around as well and searching for something, and then told us all about the equipment and stuff. Quite the expert. So we've got something there that we started to play with a little bit. And then there's some other layers of VR that we started to discover. And I wanted